Okay guys, me here, Gavin Walsh with the St. Kevin Project. Today is Monday the 19th of January 2026. Now, this is a fairly big one. This is podcast number 7, and at the intro of it, you're going to see me saying it's the 14th, the 14th of January. That's because it took a lot longer than I thought. Now, this is pretty heavy stuff, and even though I promised you all 23 videos as per one per deceased plane occupant, and there will be 23. This is number 7, as I've said, and they're all done in my head already, but what's happening is sometimes things are getting swapped out, and the reason for that can be, I don't know, strategic, whatever that fancy word is. A decision based on something I spoke about earlier, and a lot of it is going to come down to me protecting myself, because I'm starting to name a lot of big names that were involved in this cover-up. Anyway, I've also started putting them up on YouTube, because there's only so much scope on Facebook, and I believe the YouTube channel is that's the symbol, the St. Kevin Project. Let's get into this and go get yourself a can of beer, a glass of wine, a big mug of tea, whatever your preference is. This is a pretty lengthy one. I think it's about a half an hour, maybe a bit more. And okay, that's it for now, guys. Okay. Hello, my name is Gavin Walsh, and today is Wednesday, the 14th of January 2026. A couple of days back, I uploaded a video called The Soul St. Kevin Orphan, which I'm pleased to say is garnering thousands of views. In that video, I made a pretty serious claim against the Welsh and the British police, and I used the term dirty tricks. Now, I know I referenced that in a chyron down the bottom as to where that could be substantiated in one of my books. But today I'd like to actually expand on it, and as per my promise to name everybody who left Captain Keohane and Dorothy Laker and her little child who consigned them to a watery bog-hole for all eternity. Today I'm going to start naming names, and unlike other times where I've brought you into the internal rifts and arguments within the airline when they cutbacks from the 3 to 2-man cruise, I believe that was podcast 4 or 5. Unlike those events, this time we're going to go down into the bowels of the St. Kevin, and I'm going to show you some pretty serious stuff that was enacted by the highest echelons of the Welsh North Wales Police. Some of it may surprise you, some of it may not. I mean, the truth always comes out in the wash. Now, before I go into that, I would like to clarify some points first. I do these videos ad hoc. I do not have a teleprompter. I don't even have a microphone, the thing you see down here. I've none of that. I'm just one man with a camera, that's all. I've exhausted all my, I suppose you could call them investors, whatever, and I'm on my own to the finish line, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm absolutely okay with it, because what I have is an abundance of enthusiasm, but what I have is truth on my side, and I'm going to out the truth in the remainder of these videos. And to anyone who's enjoying, who's along for this journey, and specifically the victims' families, we will have resolve in this, that I guarantee you. Okay. Because I don't use a teleprompter, what I do is generally I look at a few points and I memorize what I want to talk about. And invariably there's going to be little mistakes along the way, and I usually chyron those at the bottom. You'll often see oops, and if I say something wrong. But it turns out that Dave Simmons, he would be the young boy who watched his grandfather cry when the train door opened on the lone carriage on the route. He was the grandfather of Nicky Laker, who stood in the field. Well, his grandson Dave Simmons has sent me an email, and he's very happy with the video, and he put in 1 or 2 little corrections, which I'll now bring to you. When I used the word Peterborough, I meant Petersfield, which is very near Midhurst. It was the main station, I believe, on the London Southampton line, and it was from that station that the sequence of the smaller line branched across. The other thing he brought to my attention, which I genuinely did not know about, was there was compensation paid to the Lakers in England, not the boy in Canada, not the Martin family. It was minute. It was the minimal that they were entitled to. The Laker family in Midhurst got a total of £400. The father, for the loss of his son, got 200, which in today's money is about £6,000. So the father got 200, and Victor, who went busting his balls off, for want of a better word, trying to get to the bottom of this horrific cover-up, he got £100, or about 3,000 in today's money. And his sister, who's the mother of the young boy who watched his grandfather in the field, she got another 100. So it was 200 to dad, 100 to a brother, and 100 to a sister. British pounds in all cases, of course. So I would just like to clarify that. Okay. And on the subject of clarifications, I'm starting to get, because my videos have gone from double digits to hundreds, and now they're going into the thousands, and let's hope this continues to hold course. I'm starting to get a few private messages and queries, and are you the guy behind the Sex Pistols collector's book and the collector? And the answer is yes, that was me in a previous life. And indeed, the reason that I'm finding it a tad funny is I was actually sent a photograph of a guy who lives very near the crash site. I believe it's in Caertho. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Caertho. It's very near, I believe, Caernarvon, and it's pretty close to the crash site. And I've sent a photo of this guy holding up my book. So if I can work it, I'll stick a copy of it up here. So just to clarify that, and actually, speaking of the Pistols, it's hard to believe that they broke up 48 years ago today, January the 14th. That's just so hard to believe. And just to put it on record, I'm very happy of my previous life and having collected a fantastic collection. I'm not a bit happy about having sold it off piecemeal, but you do those things when you suffer from ill health and ill wealth. You know, that's just the way it goes, as we say. Them's the breaks. Okay. One final thing I forgot to touch on in regard to the message I got from David Simmons. That is the young boy who watched his grandfather cry as the train stopped to show his son's coffin. So Dave Simmons is a nephew of Nicky Laker, the senior Aer Lingus captain killed in the St. Kevin crash. Dave Simmons' mother was Nicky's sister. And Dave has asked me, do I know anything about the doll? Now, the doll is very pivotal and very poignant to our story, because as the workmen toiled the mountaintop that night, you know, going through human remains and you name it, and they were up against it. And there was still raging fires across in the immediacy of the crash. And one of them found a doll. Now, because a doll has an elasticity in it, the doll was the absolutely only intact object that came out of the entire crash. And when one of them held up the doll, the whole lot of the workers, the mountain rescuers, broke down crying. There were RAF Mountain Rescue Squad. There was police officers, local police officers, and the firemen from all around the region. Port Maddock was the big one. The doll is a very touching story, and I would just like to say that the doll is a lot more complex than much you might think, and indeed the doll is worthy of its own video, and I'm going to do a podcast called That St. Kevin Doll. And there were at least two. I interviewed at least two men in their 90s who were involved with this story of the doll, and the night all the workmen broke down crying. And of course, after they broke down crying, it was a huge sense of relief, or release, I should say, an emotion, and a release of an abundance of emotions. And then they just got back at, as Christy McCran said to me, that was a Sligo man. He said, you know, after we had a big, huge gather around cry, he said, we just got back at what we were sent here to do, which was gathering up body parts and whatever they could put their hands on, possessions and stuff. Anyway, let's get into this video. Okay. Okay, into the main core of this video. It's going to be a two-part video. The first part is something I want to address as to the shockingness of the Laker grave being left open down in the Midhurst for effectively the 3 weeks that were left in the month of January. Also, while the airline and the authorities in North Wales knew there was no hope of any recovery of the mother and daughter, because they had sealed the graves, the crash hole. And much and all as the spirit of Captain Q, senior Aer Lingus captains James Richard Jimmy Keohane, and senior Aer Lingus captain Richard Nicky Laker, and indeed Aer Lingus first officer Alec Newman, and while I'm at it, Aer Lingus air stewardess Marie Deirdre Sutton, much and all as they would love to see their story, much as their spirits might love to see their names vindicated in a court of law. I have to prepare for any eventuality in the off chance that will happen. So whilst I don't use a teleprompter, I am going to be repeatedly looking at notes here. So without further ado, here we go. At 1:30 on the Tuesday, so the crash happened on Thursday at 7:15 p.m. on Thursday, the 10th of January. So let's roll on to the Tuesday, and it's 1:30 in the afternoon. And Inspector R.C. Morris from Clondudno Police Station was in charge of the mountain at that time. Obviously, it changed with shifts and by day and everything else, but R.C. Morris was our man. Now, I never established what the initials R.C. were. It would likely be Robert, but that's a guess. And under his care was a man called Police Constable Thomas Williams from Bedgellert. Now, he was such a popular man, that the latter Thomas Williams, that he actually was known locally as the Parish of Bedgellert Police Constable. So he was under the jurisdiction, I suppose, for want of a better word, of R.C. Morris. Now, R.C. Morris attended the mountain that afternoon on the Tuesday, the 15th of January, and he liaised with Aer Lingus's chief operations manager, a man by the name of Captain William Joseph Scott, who was from Dunkerron, Greenfield Road, Sutton County, Dublin. And he was the man who made the decision. Now, he obviously made it on behalf of bigger, higher people, but he made the decision to seal the crash site for all eternity. And we know this, thankfully, to a plethora of documents I was given that were saved by a suspecting, or I suppose a conscientious police officer. Not the police officers' names I just mentioned, by the way. But R.C. Morris came back, Inspector R.C. Morris came back, and he documented all of this. So basically what you had was between 1:30 and 3:30, and those times are very precise. On the Tuesday, the 15th of January, R.C. Morris and the PC Constable Thomas Williams stayed with Captain Scott of Aer Lingus Chief Operation Officer. Now, with them also was the last of the RAF Mountain Rescue Squad, which included Sligo man Christopher McCran. If any of you watching my videos, or the launch videos, I should say, you'll see Christy being mentioned in lots of places. Christy was a mountain of information. In any event, at 3:30, Inspector R.C. Morris decided to leave the mountain, and with that, he agreed. It wasn't within his remit to give permission, but he agreed that Captain Scott, that was the end of the matter. Now, PC Thomas Williams stayed on, and they stayed on till 7:15 that evening, which is a bit ironic, and I think it was pure coincidence that they left the mountaintop for the very last time, all of them, at 7:15 p.m. that evening, which is the reason I say it's coincidental or ironic is it's precisely 5 days to the time of the crash, which was 7:15 p.m. Tuesday. So what you have is Inspector R.C. Morris vacating the site at 3:30 p.m. on that Tuesday, and 7:15 p.m. everybody leaves. And at the time they were all leaving, Captain Scott from Aer Lingus, he gave them all a warm handshake and thanked them all. And of course it was nightfall at this point, and thanked them profusely, and especially the RAF Mountain Rescue Squad for all the hard work they had done over the previous 5 days. 5 days and nights the RAF were there non-stop, so but with that, all hope was extinguished of ever getting Dorothy and Melody, and indeed Captain Keohane, and indeed several others. And anybody wants to come up against me on that, be my guest, because I have the coroner's reports, okay? And I promise never to be graphic with the story, and I never will be, but I can tell you what went into some of those coffins wasn't worth talking about. And that's all I'll say on the matter, unless I'm pushed. Legally speaking. But anyway, back to the tragic tragedy of it all. On a sort of a lighter note, when R.C. Morris was going down the mountain, Inspector R.C. Morris, so he was going down the mountain, we'll say between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, he met two men coming up, and one of those men was Maurice Gaffney, who had lost his brother in the crash, and Maurice Gaffney's first cousin, who was, and obviously Maurice Gaffney had lost his brother Jim Gaffney, Dr. James Cyril Gaffney, in the crash, and he was one of the leading pathologists, not just in Ireland, in Britain as well at that time, and he was returning from having given a lecture on in pathology to the Pathological Association of Britain. And the crash scene had been closed off largely from the morning after the crash, where people weren't allowed to attend. But that particular morning, the scene was closed at the bottom of the mountain, obviously. And then that particular afternoon, Maurice Gaffney and his first cousin, Dr. O'Brien, Michael O'Brien was his name, and he was a medical doctor. And they persuaded the authorities to let them up, given their credentials. Maurice was a trainee barrister and had plenty of legal knowledge, I suppose. And the other man that was with him was a medical doctor. Now, Maurice had made a promise to his mother that they would do whatever they could to bring anything home of Jim. Alas, it was not to be. But we know this, and this goes into the sheer, I suppose, incredible accuracy of the documents I was able to get my hands on. R.C. Morris, Inspector R.C. Morris from Clondudno, actually put this in his file, that on the way down he had met these two men, Maurice Gaffney and Dr. Michael O'Brien. So that just adds up to the authenticity of the whole thing, you know, because then when I was able to interview Maurice Gaffney, I interviewed Maurice several times, and he lived right up to 100 years of age. In fact, he practiced law right into his 100th year. And Maurice's story never wavered from it matched up perfectly with the police reports I was lucky to get my hands on. But the upshot of all this is that there was no need to keep the Laker grave open for 3 weeks. Can you just think about that? You know, the cruelness of this, the callousness of it. But it was all done to protect the true cause of the crash. And the true cause of the crash was all rewritten to protect the airline from the airplane being off course. And the airplane being off course was all to do with protecting the airline from flying a dangerous route, i.e. the direct route. And the protection of the nullification of it coming out that the route was dangerous was the protection of Aer Lingus from litigation. So we're back to the same old, the root of all evil, money. It all came down to money. The saving by going on this route was to save money. The consequences of it and the corruption of the investigation immediately after the crash, which led to the corrupt inquiry, was all to save money on litigation. And indeed, I would go so far as to say that I'm battling against it here today. I'm on my own with a little camera phone, and I'm very happy to be on my own, as I've already said, okay? Nobody's going to go up against big powers and big bucks, but we will have resolve, okay? Let's get into part 2. Okay, welcome to part 2 of podcast 7. Just something comes to mind as I'm thinking this through. When I was a young child, my grandfather once said to me, if you have anything to say to somebody, put it in writing and sign it and date it, and don't ever hide behind anonymity. So I thought about this as I spoke on the last video where I talked about dirty tricks, and the senior police officer in North Wales, along with his counterparts down in London, pulling off a dirty tricks campaign against Victor Aker. So now I would like to qualify that and to offer evidence as to its having occurred. This goes back to a flight that took place immediately on the night after the tragedy. I shouldn't say immediately, excuse me. The crash was at 7:15. The authorities all knew St. Kevin was gone by 8 o'clock. They all knew there was no hope by 8:39. They was hoping it might have crash landed or crashed in the sea. In fact, there was even lifeboats launched. But by about 8:30 or 9, everybody in the system knew there was no hope. St. Kevin was gone. And I guess what you would call a shouting match took place between the airline's deputy chief pilot, Captain Tommy Handley, and the airline's general manager or CEO, Jeremiah Dempsey. Took place in Dempsey's office that evening at about 9:30. What nobody knew, but Dempsey knew, and the people high up in the Irish government knew, was that a charter flight was being organised for a select few to fly across to Wales. And that flight left Dublin Airport at about 11 o'clock. We know for sure it landed at 11:45, and it landed in the Valley RAF military base in Anglesey. So you're looking at about a 45 minute flight. So on that flight were a very select few company men and an Irish senior civil servant. And the whole essence, you can be sure that the whole talk on that flight came down to two words: damage limitation. Now, I will go into that flight at a later stage. In fact, that will be its own video called The Magnificent Seven. But the sole reason I'm mentioning it to you here now is that there was Aer Lingus's in-house solicitor or lawyer was on board that flight. And again, going back to me having to be precise from here on in, his name was a man called P.J. Brennan, I guess Paddy Joe Brennan. And Paddy Joe Brennan was sent over with this group of people, and his whole job was to keep everything as legal as possible and liaise with legal people on the ground and evidently protect the airline. And so late and all as the night was, it was now midnight or even after midnight. In fact, probably quite substantially after midnight by the time they got into Bangor, where they were all staying. There was a media scrum, and the press were firing all sorts of questions at these men. And the Aer Lingus in-house solicitor, P.J. Brennan, said the following words to the press. It is not possible to guess, as many of the local residents are now doing, as to which way or as to what position the aircraft hit the ground. You can be sure that for him to say that statement, that was said in a responsitory type of whatever they were saying to him. You know, is it true that this and that and the other? The press already had been on the ground, and in fact, some of the true direction and the final vectors, etc., of the plane came up in the local press the next morning, where the press had already been getting it into their columns from right before midnight. So a lot of the truth came up in the papers the next day, before the huge cover-up was put in place. But P.J. Brennan consulted, on that trip over, on the following day, P.J. Brennan consulted the services of a local-based solicitor. Now, this guy was an extraordinarily colourful character. And to this day, he's well remembered in Caernarvon and North Wales. In fact, he's remembered farther out than North Wales. His name was Owen Appy Goronoway Hughes. Now, or Ewan, I guess it is, I-E-U-A-N. And Ewan translates to John, and AP means the son of. It's a Welsh term, and but basically he was known as Appy Hughes. A-P-P-Y is the pronunciation of it. Appy Hughes. And there was regular jokes about him when I was doing my research. That the talk about him in the 50s and 60s was, if you want to get away with murder, you apply the services of Appy Hughes. But Appy Hughes took over the entire legal aspect of it in North Wales on behalf of P.J. Brennan. And he was a very controversial character. And he himself became a thorn in the butt of the coroner by asking, could things be expedited, and could the crash hole be cleaned or sealed, and could the coroner, in fact, he actually asked the coroner on the first on the opening of the inquest on the Monday the 14th of January, could the coroner not just go ahead and issue death certs? And the coroner, in fairness, being a proper upstanding medical man, absolutely refused and told him his request was borderline ridiculous. And indeed it took two sessions of inquest to finally get to the bottom of what they died of, which of course we all know, but it had to go through its legal course. Now, on the second side, I want you to park Appy Hughes in your mind. On the second round of inquest, the 28th of January, so they were held 2 weeks apart. Victor Laker, we're back to Victor Laker again, and this will close out the Laker video, podcast 6 video. Victor Laker demanded to get into he was not invited to the second round of inquest, but again he made his mark at them, and he boxed the coroner into a corner that could the coroner guarantee him that his sister-in-law and his niece would never ever be found, that not even a trace of him. And he even spoke of bone fragments, meaning the child was 4.5 years old, little Melody, and how she would be easily distinguishable from any other victim. And again, he put the coroner in a very bad position with these questions. And again, he raised the ugly question of the plane's true direction and the plane's circling motion. And again, he was met with, I guess, a brick wall. And in fairness to the coroner didn't have those answers for him. But those questions went on the record. And Victor Price would pay a terrible price for this a month and a day later, on February the 29th, 1952. Victor Laker got a knock on his door. He was living in London at the time. And again, I'm going to have to go to notes here to be specific in case this ends up in court. Victor Laker got a knock on his door on Friday, the 29th of February. And it was from a man who introduced himself as a detective sergeant from the London Metropolitan Police Force. And his name was E. Taylor. And he was from the Lee Road Police Station from the Aer Division. He came to question Victor Laker on missing monies, or rather inflated expenses. No? And he asked Victor Laker, did Victor Laker want to issue a statement on it, or to, I suppose, incriminate himself? And Victor Laker, as I've already explained to you, was both a chartered accountant and a professional auditor, and a man of good smarts. And Victor Laker, initially, when the policeman arrived at the door, Victor Laker expected the best, that he was there to tell him, because he came in uniform. Victor Laker expected him to tell him that the sister-in-law, Dorothy, and the niece, Melody, had been found. And by the way, what I forgot to say is that even at that second inquest, not one pip out of Aer Lingus that the hole was closed, and there was no hope of them being found. So you can see the nonsense that was going on here. But as soon as Victor Laker realised what this guy was about, that he was questioning him on his own integrity, and by the way, the matter came down to £3 or something. A frivolous amount of money, given what the expenses were what the expenses had been run up by the different parties at the time, which in fairness to Aer Lingus they were taken care of. Victor Laker asked the man to leave his house, and that he would deal with the matter himself. Now, Victor Laker dealt with that matter with a monster letter, which I've reproduced in Volume 3, Thy Will Be Done, with a monster letter directly to Caernarvon Police HQ. And indeed, Victor Laker used those words to Detective E. Taylor at his front door, and he said to him, listen, I'll deal with this matter. And he bypassed him. Now, we know that this was not accidental, because these guys left a monster paper trail. Now, and the paper trail was saved by a police officer in North Wales for decades. So what you have is a police officer incriminating another police officer, or a sequence of police officers. Anyway, let me get back to this, because it's not a funny matter, I should say. We know this because 4 days later, on the 4th of March 1952, Registry Folio number 67-66-52, Detective Sergeant Taylor penned an internal memo to the Chief Inspector of London CID. I have contacted the equivalent of the CID today, and they have been helpful. They've sent me a photograph, but he wrote a detailed 2-page letter. Now, it's quite obvious what has happened. Sergeant Taylor, Detective Sergeant Taylor here, he realises he's been a patsy, and he doesn't want to get, he doesn't know what's going on, he just doesn't want to get involved. But he puts in 3 words after Victor Harold Laker's name, and he says, no convictions traced. Now, that to me is clearly disturbing, and whether Detective Sergeant Taylor smelled a rat or not, he was evidently covering his own tracks, that this guy was squeaky clean. In any event, as I've said, Victor Laker did write a substantial, and this is reproduced in Thy Will Be Done letter, I believe it was 682 words, detailing exactly everything about it. And he even goes into minute detail how the train got stopped in snow and he had to get a meal and all that kind of stuff. And I believe he offered to repay the paltry £3. In any event, the bullying tactic did not work. Now, I guess today, Detective Sergeant Taylor and his boss in the CID would probably get a slap on the wrist. Maybe not even because they were just used in this, they were given a. So what you had basically was a top policeman in North Wales sending this request across to the top man in CID deputising it out to Detective Sergeant Taylor. And so in the end, it proved to be nothing except, I guess, a scare tactic. Now, let's come back to Appy Hughes. Appy Hughes had a wild reputation now for doing whatever it took to get his client off, I guess. Now, we do know who sent the letter, who sent the telegram down from Wales to the CID. And that was the Caernarvon Police Station Superintendent, and indeed the Chief Constable, Griffith William Roberts, or G.W. Roberts. And the letter that he sent down was reference number A-10. And it was actually written between him and the coroner for South Caernarvonshire, or the county of Caernarvon, Mr. Irwin Robbins Owen. Now, in all fairness to these two guys, they were probably stitched up themselves by Appy Hughes, who was looking for any clink he could, especially after Victor Laker's showing at the second round of inquest and asking some very serious questions. So, of course, the saddest part of all this is the treacherousness in everything, that those who suffered at the end of the day were those who were never repatriated. And of course, not only Captain Keohane left in the plane, but put off course by corrupt investigators after the fact. So having his reputation destroyed and then left in a bog-hole to protect that destruction, or to protect that cover-up. I mean, it just beggars belief. Anyway, that's the upshot of this one, guys. And I'll get podcast date down as soon as I can. Okay, everybody, cheers. And thanks for watching, by the way. You guys are all I have at this point, my viewers. All right, cheers.